Hi, my name's Richard Dethridge, and I'm 63 years old, coming up here next week. So, um, time sure flies. I just wanted to leave a message with young men out there today that are having a hard time going through school and all the issues and problems with all the DEI that's going through the school systems and the transgender scenario that's going on. And we just didn't have that when I was a kid, and I just wanted to say something about it because it's wrong, what's going on. But I want everybody to know that when you're going through those ages and when you're a kid and teenager, and when I was a kid, when I was 13, they found a lump in my chest, and we went into the doctors and the doctors examined it and looked at it and said, well, you're just deciding if you're going to be a boy or a girl. I was petrified because I was all boy. So I did, the doctor said, why don't you just go out there and start swinging some baseball bats and toss a ball around some more. And that's what I did. And here I am. Been a man all my whole life. But that was my scare to something like that. And I guess your body does go through different scenarios, so it happens. But just so you know, it's not the reason to change your gender, and it's just not the right thing to do. And to push it like they are, it's just wrong. There's a right and a wrong in the world, and that's just plain wrong. And that's my opinion, but I think I'm right, and I know I'm right. There's other things too about when you're young and growing up, and you don't think there's a lot of things that you got to do, or you can't figure out what you want to do. There's a lot of scenarios you can run across, and a lot of people you can talk to. There's counselors you can talk to, and they can give you different ideas of what to go and to learn in school. But for me, my lucky break was when I was 16 years old, and I was going the wrong way, and I wasn't interested in school at all. I was taking a mechanical drafting class, and I was bored drawing nuts and bolts, and that was my second year going into that, and it just didn't interest me at all. So I started cutting this class and started going to Folsom Lake and hanging out at the lake. And until I got caught the third time I cut the class, they caught on to me and they busted me. And my drafting teacher, they put me in detention, and I was in detention for 2 weeks during the winter. And it was 1978. And we were still drawing everything by hand with a lead pencil back in those days. And the one thing that I kind of remember going through was when my teacher, he was a mentor to me. He took me aside and said, look, you're going the wrong way, and I know you're bored drawing nuts and bolts, and we've talked about that, and we did. And Mr. Theobald, and he told me, well, look, I got a house for you to draw. Are you interested in architecture at all? And I was, well, no, but yeah, I'll try it. And so he took me out to job sites in his pickup truck, and he took me around to different job sites in the area and showed me this is the foundation, this is where they dig the foundations, and set the forms for the footings, and set the plumbing and the underground water lines and the concrete, how it got poured. And he just took me to each different stage of the development that we were in, and walking around, and it was the best class I ever had, and it really caught my interest. So it's the mentors you meet that teach you the right and wrong. They give you that little spark, that little inspiration, that little break to get you going. And if you're lucky enough to have that, and you can always talk to anybody too, any of your teachers, a subject you're interested in. But my lucky break came with that, and I ended up drawing this house, and they ended up building it. And I was only 16. I drew my first house. So I had a set of plans, and I went, through the next year. My teacher signed me up for ROP, Regional Occupation Program, which is a trade program in school, and he signed me up with an architect. And I had another lucky break. I was working as a cowboy on a ranch with a guy, and his name was Eddie Murphy, of all names. And the guy had me driving horses all over the state, and mares and foals that weren't taken full, and we're taking the horses and selling them and going around the whole country, all through the foothills of Northern California. It was a great job. I loved it, and so I did that, and I ended up meeting an architect, because Eddie Murphy, he knew that I design a home, and he knew an architect. So he talked to the architect and introduced me to him, and we became friends. And I told him about my ROP program coming up, and he said, well, hey, I'm taking in interns. He goes, why don't you come work for me? I was like, okay. So that's how that started. So it's just the lucky breaks you run across, through your life. You just got to get out there and do it. You can't sit behind a TV screen and play video games all day long. You got to get out there and visit the world and meet people and run across different situations. So that was my second and third lucky break, when I was a kid. And those mentors really helped me out. They were really interested in helping me. And that's what mentors are for. They're out there, and they want to help. And so when I got done, going through ROP in high school, I was going through my senior year. I was going to school half a day and didn't have to cut anymore, and I was getting the other half a day going to ROP and working for the architect, and I was learning how to design apartment buildings. So that was my first project. I was designing apartment buildings, and with other architects. But I was learning. I drew the 1/8" scale part of the whole building, and it was fun. I enjoyed it, and it caught my interest, and it's what I wanted to do. And eventually, when I got done working with him, I graduated high school and worked for him through the summer. And I went to summer school at Sierra College in Rockland, California. I live in Sacramento. And I started going to school taking a couple classes, and it just didn't interest me again. Here I was getting ready, I was cutting the classes I was paying for in college. So how stupid is that, right? So I took my set of plans, and I went out and was looking for a job. Actually the architect I worked for, Robert Schaefer and Associates, he told me, hey, you can make some good money as a carpenter, so why don't you go out there and learn how to build from the ground up? And, some great advice, So I went out and got a job as a carpenter, and I ran across a guy by the name of John Moyer, JMC Homes. And he was only 26 years old, and he was building the development of homes. So he had his own amazing story and mentors that he had. So my lucky break with him was becoming a finish carpenter for him. And then I worked for him as a finish carpenter for a few months. And then after that, I saw the job was kind of slowing down, wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I brought my set of plans with me, and I showed him my architectural drawing that I did. And he was impressed, and he was like, hey, that's good. I'll keep this in mind, and I'll have you draw a house for me. So, through that winter, I went to work on a house at Sea Ranch, and I spent a couple summers there, a couple winters there, working on his homes that he was building, working on the interior finish work, putting cedar in walls and ceilings, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. I was traveling. I was young and 19, getting out there, feeling what it was like to, go out there, make money, and enjoy the world. So that was another break I had you know. So it's just those mentors you run across in your life that you're just lucky to run across them. And you got to go out there, but you got to be out there and work, and you got to get out of the house and get out from behind the TV screen and stop playing the damn video games, and man up and start going out there and making some money. Because once you make your first paycheck, then you realize, hey, I can buy my own cowboy boots and buy my own pants and buy a shirt that I like, and that's the way it started for me. So you learn, and I worked for John Moyer for 8 years, and I learned development work, and I worked with civil engineers and laying out utilities for the SPUD and PG&E, and on the lot plans and plot plans, and drawing the lots by hand, and placing the house on there to scale, and flopping the houses around to get them to fit the lots. And it was fun. It was enjoyable, and I learned a lot from John Moyer. And he was a great mentor, great teacher, and I really appreciate working with him at that time. And so I got lucky, and I drew 12 developments for him. Went back and figured it out, and there was about 12 developments that I did, and drew the master plans for the developments, and drew five plans with 3 different elevations to it. So that was my start in architecture, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I ended up, after working with John for 8 years, I went on my own and had to test the waters. So I met another developer, and his name was Don McCormick, another guy by the name of Jack Frost. And I worked with him for another year, and drew a couple of his developments for him. So that was enjoyable, working with those guys. And you just run across people, and they find out you're drawing houses for them, and they said, hey, why don't you come work for me and draw my homes for me? So that's just the way it panned out for me. And I was just a draftsman doing it by hand with a lead pencil. They had CAD systems. They were in the beginning stages, but it was kind of hard to draw a house on a little tiny 12-inch screen, computer screen, and you couldn't get the feel for it. And so that's what I did, and just kind of went along from there. Got my contractor's license, and built some homes, and designed some homes, designed a lot more homes, and started a carpentry business doing finished work and custom homes, and just kept moving up from there. And you get married, and you get settled down, and you learn that you gotta provide a steady income, and I couldn't provide a steady income, and I told you that on the last video, and about taking the leap of faith. And so I took my leap of faith, and it didn't work the first time, but I was young, and I had my own business, and it just didn't work out. So I didn't provide. I wasn't a good provider for her, and it was my fault. And we ended up breaking up and going our own separate ways. And I met my other wife, Sarah, which was in the first video. So about grieving. So you go through life, and you have different stages, and you meet different people, and you go from there. You just never know what's going to happen. And so I ended up working for different companies, and as a carpenter, and did a lot of work like that, and worked my way up to be a superintendent, and became a superintendent for different companies, and kind of went from job to job, and enjoyed doing that as the economy came and went. Because when you have economies going ups and down, it slows everything down. Like in '91, we had a little recession from the Gulf War starting, so things kind of slowed down a little because nobody knew what was going to happen with the economy. So in economic indicators, or what I ended up learning from John Moyer, and because we had the economic boom of the '80s, when that happened, and he needed me to draw his homes for him, so we had this big boom, and we're going to have that again with Trump and his what he's got going on, and his tariffs, and the economy is just going to start booming. So I could see it coming on. So you guys out there behind those computer screens better figure out what you're going to do. And if you want to look for love and have a family, you better get out there and start doing it. So figure it out like I did. And you can learn from my story. And, after that, I ended up working in, like, I told you my story about Sarah and myself and how we started and how that all came about. And, that all worked out until, there's other recessions that happened, like in '08, we had a recession. And that knocked me on the ground. I was off for 14 months out of work. But I was lucky enough to my dad was sick at the time, so I ended up having to help him, so kind of was a blessing in a way. But I ended up doing that and taking that time off to be with him, like a long goodbye. And that was I was glad that happened, and not that he passed away, of course, but during that time I started writing. So, you never know what's going to happen, and leads to different things in your life. I never figured I'd be a writer. And I started writing my story from a show, the movie that me and my dad saw. And it was The Bucket List in 2010. So that Bucket List movie came out, and we were laughing. We enjoyed that movie. And we started thinking about our bucket list. And my dad always wanted to write a book. And he goes, well, Richard, you had an interesting life. You should write your story. So I started writing our story, because my dad was in the military, and when I was a kid, I was an Air Force brat. So every 4 years we were moving. So, it wasn't a stable, it was a stable family unit together, But we didn't have other family around us. It was just us. And we went every 4 years. We moved from Air Force Base to Air Force Base, and I always thought of it as an adventure and enjoyed it. And so I wrote a book about it, and about that, and about my adventures with my mentors growing up. So you never know what you're going to run across. I wrote the whole story out, and it sat on the shelf for 10 years. From '08 to 2018, until my niece read it, Samantha. And she read it, and she said, Uncle Richard, this will be an excellent book. You should make it a book. So I thought about it and started figuring out a beginning and an end to it. And so I wrote my book. And it was a self-published book. I just self-published it on Amazon. And when I wrote the book, I hired a guy to proofread it. And, I didn't know how to write a book, but I had a certain style and flow to it that he liked. And he said he corrected 900 errors. So, obviously I didn't know how to write, but you hire the right people to take care of things, and it'll get done right. So he proofread my book and corrected all my errors. And I wrote my first book called The Last Lead Holders. So that got me thinking about, different scenarios and different things. After I wrote the book, when COVID came around, I started thinking of different things. And one thing that came to mind was the pencil, the old lead pencil, the number 2 pencil. And you think about it, it's got everything involved with mankind, if you look at it that way. And we're all last lead holders if you think about it, because you got the black lead core, which is from the African continent. Then you got the kind of like the brown worn out end where you sharpen the pencil. That's kind of the Latin part of South America and the Latin part of the world. And then you got the eraser, which is the indigenous people of North America. And then you got the yellow, which is all the Asian population, in China and Vietnam and all through that. And you think about it, and then you got the interior. When you break it open, it's white. So you got all the races of mankind right here in your pencil. Who knew, right? But that's what I thought about this, and I ended up writing a poem about it. And I put it at the end of the book, of the original self-published book, and I'm going to read it to you. And here's the book. It was a self-published book called The Last Lead Holders. And the poem's called, the same title as the book, The Last Lead Holders. I grew up when there were troubled times upon our land, as I looked for my dad on TV as the war raged in Vietnam. I lived where there was racism all around, where there was buses from school, we were bused from school to school. I was just a child who knew, as I sharpened my pencils with its shavings all around, they were black, brown, white, and yellow. As I looked at his connection to red, as we all saw the photo of the earth for the first time in school, man, that was really cool. For the first time, that was like 68. So those early Apollo missions. And then, so that was really cool. I thought of our world as a child, as I used my pencil through time, where the black lead core was worn constantly, as we all make mistakes through time. We used the red eraser until near its end, as we all saw the Cold War come to the end. As the last lead holder story goes, when will we all live by the golden rule? We are closer to becoming one than ever before, with computers all around. For I may never know, as I look at the children playing at our family gatherings all around. With the earth on my screensaver now, I always knew we were always one. Now my pencil is done, until the end of all racism. So, that's what I wrote in my book, and kind of fitting for the times we are in today, after COVID. And I grew up in Mississippi at one point. My dad was stationed at Columbus Air Force Base, and I saw all the horrors of racism. And I was 7 or 8 years old, and I knew it was wrong then when I was that age. And they were treated terrible. People were treating black people terrible. And I don't blame the black people for being the way they are, but at some point you got to forgive America and move on. And we thought we all did when we got Obama in office, and he was voted in. I didn't vote for him, but I didn't think he was ready enough, and I turned out being right, as far as I'm concerned. He turned around and brought racism back, and as far as I'm concerned, it just totally changed. And it didn't change for the better; it changed for the worse, as far as I'm concerned. And then, when COVID came through, racism started raising its ugly head again, and BLM and Black Lives Matter and Antifa showing its ugly head, and going around and destroying cities and people's businesses and property, and just rioting, and what a joke that was. And I wrote another poem about that, which that's another story. So I'm going to end this one here now with the last of the lead holder story, and I hope you liked it. Talk to you later.